One way to self-test is to make your own practice quizzes and use them to test yourself. An important benefit is that you can target the content and types of questions that will be on exams. This video is in two parts. Part 1 focuses on how to make good practice questions, and Part 2 on how to use them to self-test effectively. Let's start with making good practice questions. Good practice questions have three essential features. First, they include content that will be on the test. This is pretty obvious. You want your practice questions to encompass the content and concepts that will be on your exams. The problem is that not all content in a course will appear on a test. So you need to identify what you think are the main topics and ideas, the ones that are most test-worthy. This involves looking at the topics and ideas from class, homework, and outside readings. If your teacher highlights topics for the exam or provides a study guide, you definitely need to create questions on those topics. Second, good practice questions involve the same kind of thinking that will be expected on the exam. For example, suppose you make practice questions that focus on factual information, such as definitions of new terminology. These will help you learn the definitions. However, if the exam involves not just remembering facts, but using the subject matter, like analyzing or evaluating ideas, then your factual questions may not help you very much. You need to practice with some questions that involve analyzing and evaluating the subject matter. And third, you develop a model answer for each of your questions. A model answer includes relevant information and ideas in response to the question. It does not need to be a polished essay. Instead, it can be an outline or bulleted list. The most important thing is to include the key ideas. Let's look at a few examples of questions that involve different types or complexity of thinking. Of course, these won't necessarily match the types of questions on your exams, but they can help you think about how to pose questions that address different types of thinking. First, the first question is a factual question. It involves recalling a specific fact or idea. Here are two examples. What is self-testing? And second, define self-testing. This is the kind of question you can answer by remembering a definition from class or from your reading. The second type of question involves explaining. Explaining or giving an account of how or why something works or happens. Here are three examples. What makes self-testing an effective learning strategy? Explain how self-testing facilitates improvement in learning. Suppose a friend asks you to explain why self-testing is better than rereading. What would you tell them? In these cases, you need to develop a plausible account of how self-testing affects learning. You may have to integrate ideas from several sources. A third kind of question involves prediction. Given a scenario or a problem, predict and explain the outcome. Here's a type of prediction question. In one class, the teacher gives a practice quiz at the start of every class period and online practice quizzes between class periods. In another class, the teacher sets aside the time for students to read and reread course material each class period. Predict how well students will do on course exams. Explain the reasons for your prediction. A fourth type of question is application, where you apply knowledge to a new context. Here's an example. You have a test in 2 weeks. It will cover 2 chapters in the text and several additional readings. Describe a plan for how you can use self-testing to help prepare for the test. And fifth is a multi-part problem or question. Here's an example. Research studies have compared the relative effectiveness of practice testing versus rereading. What is the general finding about the relative effectiveness of these two strategies? Second, explain the reasons for the differences. And third, describe one study that examined practice testing versus rereading. Notice that except for the factual question, the other examples require more complex thinking, explaining, predicting, applying, and so forth. In order to answer these questions, you need a deeper grasp of the subject matter. Fortunately, by practicing with these questions, you develop better understanding of the material and you will be better able to answer these types of questions. These are only a few ways to pose questions that involve different types of thinking. In your classes, your instructor may tell you what kinds of questions to expect or provide a study guide with examples of test questions. Moreover, after the first quiz or test in a class, you may be able to determine what types of questions the instructor is likely to ask. Although it takes more time to create good practice questions, there are two advantages. Practicing with more complex questions is likely to promote deeper understanding of the subject matter. In a sense, you can work toward greater mastery of the topic, which should translate into better test performance. Once you've developed a good test question, you can practice it periodically during the term. By the end of the semester, you should have a very solid grasp of the topic. In Part 2, we examine guidelines for effective self-testing. The basic self-testing procedure is straightforward. You have a batch of practice questions and their answers. These can be written on note cards, paper, computer file, or even a digital testing application such as Quizlet. Question on one side and the answer on the opposite side. Each time you study, you work your way through the practice questions. Look at a question, try to reproduce the answer from memory without looking at the answer. Then check and review the answer. You move on to the next question and follow the same sequence. Read the question, try to answer it from memory, and then review your answer. Although the procedure is straightforward, there are several ways to optimize your learning from self-testing. This table highlights 5 key aspects of self-testing. The left column indicates things you should try to do, and the right column indicates things you should try not to do. I'll review these briefly, and you can replay this segment as needed. First, answer each question, even if it's easy or hard. Always try to recall the material and answer the questions. Don't look at the answers until you've tried to recall as much as you can. Also, answer the question if it's easy and think you don't need to answer it again. The key to learning from self-testing is the mental effort to answer the questions. Each time you try to recall the information, you learn more. Second, write or say your answer aloud. I recommend writing your answer because it's easier to check, review, and revise. If you simply think about the answer, you may have difficulty monitoring your thinking and then have difficulty checking it. Third, check and review your answers for accuracy and completeness. Checking your answer is feedback that allows you to compare what you recall with the answer. It's also an opportunity to note missing information and add it to your answer. Fourth, test yourself multiple times. Try to answer each question several times each study session. Continue to answer a question even if you answer it correctly a few times. Some researchers suggest that you answer each question correctly 9 times, 3 times in each of 3 study sessions. They contend that if you do this, there's a pretty good chance you have a solid grasp of the information. And fifth, retest throughout the course to build durable knowledge. For example, every 2 weeks, take 40 minutes to self-test with previous practice questions. These self-testing episodes will help you build durable, maybe even permanent knowledge of the topics. By the end of the term, you'll be well prepared for the final exam. Okay, what did you learn from this video? Here are 3 practice questions. Answering these will help you consolidate your knowledge of self-testing. Pause the video and take a few minutes to test yourself. Answer the questions and then replay parts of the video to check your answers. I'll read the questions. Describe the characteristics of a good practice question. 2. Describe the basic procedure for self-testing with your practice questions. And 3. If you adopted this self-testing strategy, what challenges would you expect? Now pause the video to answer the questions and again replay the video to check your answers. For more information about self-testing and other effective learning strategies, go to takinglearningseriously.com.